The fire offered meager comfort against the chill that had settled deep within their bones. It wasn't the mountain night air, it was something colder, a lingering echo of the monstrous presence they'd narrowly escaped. Alice slumped against a worn armchair, her skin clammy despite the heat radiating from the hearth. Each breath ached, each muscle screamed in protest, but sleep refused to claim her. Her mind replayed the horrific encounter, the crimson eyes, the guttural snarl that echoed in the oppressive silence of the ruined clearing. Jaden huddled close to the fire, the shadows dancing across his pale face and etching deeper lines into his wide eyes. His tattooed skin, previously a source of mystery, now seemed marked by the horror they had witnessed. Isaiah moved through the dimly lit cabin with the weary familiarity of long routine broken by sudden desperation. His hands trembled slightly as he brewed a bitter-smelling tea. "We can't stay here," Alice rasped, the words catching in her throat. "It knows where to find us." "Nowhere is safe," Isaiah replied, his voice ragged. He thrust a chip mark towards her, and despite her churning stomach, Alice forced down the scalding, foul-tasting liquid. "Not anymore." Silence settled over them, punctuated by the crackling fire and the relentless ticking of the old clock on the mantel. Each passing minute felt like a weight dragging them under. Finally, Isaiah sank onto a creaky stool, his shoulders slumping in defeat. A flicker of something akin to shame crossed his weathered features. "I should have seen it coming," he muttered. "Should have listened closer to the stories, the warnings whispered in the old words." Alice leaned forward, exhaustion momentarily forgotten. "What warnings?" she pressed, a sliver of hope reigniting within her. "There might be something, a way to stop it." Isaiah met her gaze, and for the first time, she saw the true weight of the burden he carried. "Those ways were never meant for the light," he confessed. "The stories, they were passed down, not out of pride, but in fear. My family, we." He hesitated, as if the words themselves carried a terrible power. "We were keepers of shadows, hunters of the things that lurk on the edge of the world." Alice blinked, the weariness momentarily chased away by a surge of confusion that warred with a flicker of desperate hope. "Hunters? Like ghost stories, campfire tales?" Her voice dripped with skepticism, yet there was an undercurrent of desperation in her eyes. Isaiah sighed, a long, weary exhale. "If only it were that simple," he replied. "My granddad, he used to tell me there were things older than the trees, with hungers that defy understanding. We learned how to track them, to bind them for a time." He gestured vaguely towards the worn leather-bound book lying amidst the scattered papers on the table. "Knowledge passed down, paid for in blood and sacrifice." "And Naraka," Alice said, the name feeling strange and dangerous on her tongue. "That's what you were hunting." "Hunting?" Isaiah snorted, a bitter sound in the quiet cabin. "More like hidden, hoping it stayed dormant another century or two." He reached for the book, his touch hesitant, reverential. "But it's awake now," he whispered, "and my granddad, he ain't here to stop it. Maybe," he looked at Alice with a haunted determination, "maybe the old ways, the ones I turned away from, maybe they are all we got left." Alice found herself drawn towards the book, the faded leather and brittle pages promising answers, or further madness. "And this," she reached out a tentative hand, "this tells you how to fight. It—" Isaiah nodded grimly. "Not fight, maybe. Contain, weaken long enough to," he faltered, eyes widening as a horrified realization dawned. "The ruins," he breathed. "The creature, those markings, they weren't hunting us, they were celebrating." A chill ran down Alice's spine. The ritual, the crimson eyes gleaming in the mist. It wasn't an attack. It was the breaking of a monstrous seal. "The book," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We have to know what it says." Isaiah nodded, and with trembling fingers opened the ancient tome. The pages were filled with scrawled notes in a script that made her head ache, interspersed with sketches of nightmarish creatures. Faded symbols, echoes of those she'd seen in the ruins, jumped out at her. "My granddad, he was part of the last binding ritual," Isaiah began, his voice hoarse as he labored to translate the archaic text. There were others, families sworn to this curse. His fingers traced a crude drawing of Naraka, its elongated form and multiplies burning into her memory. It thrives on fear, he murmured, pain and darkness. To weaken it, you gotta offer something else. The word hung in the air, an ominous promise and a terrible threat. The fire crackled, the ticking of the clock a relentless countdown. What kind of something else? Ellis managed to ask, the cabin suddenly feeling unbearably small, the weight of the question crushing. Isaiah ran a shaking hand through his graying hair. The old stories, he swallowed hard. They spoke of blood, of sacrifice. Not just animal, but something with. He looked towards Jaden, huddled and silent near the fire, his tattooed skin stark in the flickering light. A terrible understanding dawned in Ellis' eyes. Naraka was drawn to something in Jaden, a connection their desperate flight in the woods had only confirmed. That made him not just a victim, but potentially the key to stopping the creature and a sacrifice it might crave above all else. Isaiah flipped the pages frantically, his usually weathered face pale with urgency. He muttered half-remembered translations, snippets of warnings echoing his grandfather's gruff voice. Here, something about a binding place, a circle of stones by the waterfall where it was trapped before. His finger moved across the brittle page, tracing a rough map that stirred a flicker of recognition in Ellis. Does it say how? Ellis pressed, desperation edging out the skepticism still clinging to the edges of her mind. Another page, another monstrous sketch, this one surrounded by runes that throbbed in time with the pounding in her skull. A vessel, Isaiah croaked, the word carrying chilling implications. Something to contain its essence, to weaken its hold on this world. But what kind of vessel? Ellis demanded, her voice a ragged whisper in the stifling silence of the cabin. Isaiah turned a page with trembling fingers. The drawing sent a wave of nausea through Ellis, a grotesque stone bowl etched with gruesome symbols, the shape crudely mirroring the curvature of a human skull. Not a what, Isaiah corrected, his voice shaking. A who. Someone has to carry it, and the ritual. It will suck the life out of them. He slammed the book shut, the worn leather echoing like a gunshot through the tense silence. His gaze flicked towards Jaden, the unasked question hanging heavy in the air. Jaden, drawn by the science, stared back at them. His eyes, wide and haunted, seemed to reflect the monstrous shapes from the book's pages. The tattoos on his skin, once a mystery, now seemed to pulse with a terrifying purpose. It doesn't have to be him, Ellis said, her voice barely a whisper. But even as she said it, the bitter truth settled over her like a shroud. Jaden's connection to Naraka was undeniable. The ritual, this desperate and cruel solution from the depths of the forgotten past, might be the only way to save countless lives. At a horrifying cost. The oppressive silence in the cabin was shattered by the shrill ringing of Isaiah's old, corded phone. He snatched it up, his knuckles white against the faded plastic. Isaiah, it's me. Daniel. The deputy's voice crackled through the line, laced with urgency and a tremor that could not be entirely blamed on the poor reception in the mountains. There's been an incident up on the old logging road. He didn't need to say more. The blood drained from Isaiah's face, the shadows in his eyes seeming to deepen. Ellis lunged forward, her instincts as a ranger kicking in as words stumbled from the deputy. A school bus, children, something monstrous. Then she heard it, a name that cut through the chaos and turned her world to ice. Sarah. Someone whimpered Jaden, or her, Ellis couldn't tell. Then she heard the sheriff's voice, distant yet clear, a raw, anguished shout echoing through the phone speaker. My girl, she was on that bus. You hear me? You find her. The call ended abruptly. The cabin was filled with a terrible silence, broken only by Isaiah's ragged breathing and the relentless ticking of the old clock. With a strength she didn't know she possessed, Ellis was on her feet. We need to go, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Now. Isaiah nodded, the haunted determination back in his eyes. But as he moved towards the door, his gaze snagged on the table, on the ancient book lying open like an unheeded warning. "This stays with me," he said, his voice low and rough. "If we're going to fight that thing, we need every weapon we can find, old or new." With a grim nod, Alice grabbed her pack, the weight of the situation settling upon her like a physical burden. The sheriff. There were protocols, procedures, but she would deal with those later. Right now, the image of Sarah's terrified face burned brighter than any rulebook. As they stepped out into the chill mountain air, a single thought pounded through Alice's head. The book held horrifying secrets. The bus attack was a monstrous declaration of intent, and whatever the future held, it would be forged in blood and sacrifice.